Welcome to the BLUF podcast, where you get the bottom line up front and we won't waste your time.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the BLUF Line, the bottom line up front. Again, I am your host, Command Sergeant Major Juan Jimenez. Thank you all for our continuing to listen in and continuing to give us feedback. As we all know, time is precious. Thank you for taking that time to listen in and provide that feedback. Today's podcast is unique. I'm calling it the Engaging in the Transition. And I say that because I have another special guest today with me. And what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about a transition from a non-commissioned officer to a warrant officer. Today we have that opportunity to have that special guest, CW2 Jesus Arellano from White Sands Missile Range, and I'll let him take the mic here in a little bit, but I just want to talk a little bit about that and kind of preview that engagement that we're going to have in our conversation. It's really going into how a non-commissioned officer kind of has a mental gymnastics in wanting to transition into a warrant officer, and it's usually about the 6 to 15 year mark, give or take some years, but it is engaging in that transition to considering submitting a packet to becoming an Army warrant officer. The Warrant Officer Corps was founded on July 9th in 1918 when an act of Congress created Army Mine Planter Service as part of the Coastal Artillery Corps. And with saying that, what I'd like to do is go ahead and introduce my guest for today and let him talk a little bit about himself. So without further ado, I'm introducing Chief Jesus Arellano. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Sergeant Major Jimenez. I really appreciate the time. Good afternoon to everybody listening in. A little bit about myself. Been in the Army now a little bit over 19 years. My branch is Air Defense Artillery. My MOS is 140 Kilo Air Missile Defense Tactician. And what is a warrant officer? We are the subject matter expert and the advisor to anything tactical. Now, there's two main types of warrants that most people are familiar with. One is obviously the flight warrant. That's a little bit different. Aviation is its own separate thing, and really don't have experience with that. And then you have the the technicians, and also known as the walking warrant. And we go back to our branch. Generally, you're from your feeder MOS goes back to your branch, and you're expected to have a certain level of experience within your branch before you transition over, and to be able to have that knowledge and be able to become a subject matter expert in your field. So I was a 14 Tango launcher maintainer, did that approximately 11 years. I was a sergeant first class at the time of transition, and I made the goals. I always wanted to be my launcher platoon sergeant. That was my dream. I did get an opportunity to stand in for my first sergeant on occasion, and I got a taste of that world. And at that time, I was going to be looked at for Master Sergeant. Following year, my records were good. My potential was there for promotion. But really, what drives that decision? I honestly didn't consider it. I was actually just got promoted to Sergeant First Class, and I was an SLC at the time. And a colleague of mine, called on me and said, "Hey, I'm at the schoolhouse right now as a warrant officer candidate, going through basic course. You need to go look at it." And he really pushed to go look at it. And I never really considered it because, I knew where I was. I knew as a non-commissioned officer the impact I was having on my soldiers, and I really was enjoying that aspect. And what he showed me was, there are different levels of impact, what you want to focus on. And that's what really attracted me to becoming a warrant officer. And you don't lose your leadership by any means. I mean, you bring that over, and it's really impactful on the units that you're with. All the leadership skills that you develop as a non-commissioned officer, they completely transfer over, because a lot of the times you're with smaller teams and you're by yourself, and the expectation from the leadership is that as a warrant officer, you're conducting yourself alone, and you're expected to accomplish missions weapons completely by yourself, and you're expected to manage these teams. So I mean, the overall, and I really specific about air defense, it's a very team oriented job. Specifically with my MOS as a tactician, I'm still an operator. I'm just a senior operator. It's one of my biggest jobs is to sit on the system and actually be an operator. So that really was overall what kept me really engaged in being a tactician, is that I got to be on crew. When you're a first sergeant, and sergeant major, you're advising the command team, and you're doing all that, but you're not on the system anymore. And you're overseeing the management of personnel, and it's a very important job. It takes skilled people to do that, and talented people to do that. But on the other side, you need subject matter experts on the system that know the knowledge to employ weapon systems. And you are the answer to the last problem. When everyone in the unit can't figure out how to do something, integrate something, in place something, and needs that technical knowledge, we are a network of people, and that's really the cohort.
Right. Again, I know time is precious, and I appreciate you taking the time, Chief Ariano, to come on to the podcast and talk to the listeners a little bit. And we have a background because we served together back in the day too. So it's awesome to see you as a warrant officer now, bringing in your expertise into the air defense realm. And when I think about a warrant officer, what comes to mind to me as a command sergeant major is a professional, someone with candor, someone with great knowledge, passionate, and an individual who continuously provides senior leaders and makes decisions that impact all systems around the world that our warfighters operate day in and day out. So, you do have a big job, and we rely on you. I know I relied on my warrant officers when I was a battalion sergeant major, Fort Hood, to keep us well informed of the system's capabilities, where we sat maintenance wise, how long it was going to take to get the system back up, because all that plays a part in how readiness and how we have the ability to mobilize and be prepared to fight and win today's wars. So you guys bring a big aspect to what we do every day in and day out. So where are you from, man?
So originally from Las Cruces, New Mexico. Funny story is that I'm back. My current duty station is White Sands Missile Range, which is right outside of Las Cruces, New Mexico. But that's where I started. I joined the Army in 2002 and enlisted out of Fort Bliss, Texas. That was my first duty station.
How many places you've been, man?
Oh, I've had the privilege of serving the Army in a lot of different locations: Fort Bliss, Fort Sill, Germany. Multiple tours in CENTCOM covering Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, Iraq twice, and then even in PACOM in Korea twice. So like I said, I've worked with the system in all locations that it's currently employed.
No, that's awesome. And, for an air defender, right, no matter what, if you're enlisted, if you're a warrant officer, an officer, if you're an air defender, you're going to pretty much deploy to quite a bit of places. And that's quite a bit of places that you've been in the 19 years you've been in. So thank you for your service in that aspect, too. I mean, and saying that if you're married or if you have kids, they always, play a part, because you're deploying or you're PCS and moving to different places. Well, so does the family, So, a little bit about your family, man.
So I've been my wife since high school, so high school sweethearts. We do have two boys. My oldest now is 15. My youngest is 9, about to be 10. Yeah, it's traveling the world. They've been with me through obviously multiple deployments and support, but they've also been with me overseas when we were in Germany, and then also traveled with me to Korea when I was there the second time. So, I mean, that does play a big part in understanding, when you do make that transition, and I'll kind of go back, when you do make that transition to be a warrant officer, you are making a bigger commitment. Generally speaking, it's a 6-year active duty service obligation, or ATSO, from the time that you graduate your basic course, so it's a commitment, and so that being said, is you're making that commitment as a family. And it's a great point, Sergeant Major. You make that commitment as a family because you're invested not only in, it's not just a job, it's a career, when you make that transition over, because you do have to invest a lot of time in your family. Being there to support you and being involved in your branch, it just makes the whole journey more enjoyable.
Right. No, and I would tell you that, once you make that commitment, and that's why I wanted to get a little bit of your background and kind of where you stood, because there's plenty of non-commissioned officers out there and soldiers that are probably in that same arena that you're in, married with some kids, been in the service for a few years, and then now thinking about how I can maybe extend myself a little bit more or become that technical expert. And sometimes you contemplate, because, myself, that I decided to stay on the non-commissioned officer side and keep going. You make some mental gymnastics there about the 6 to 12 to 15 year mark to say, hey, do I submit a packet as a warrant officer and change and almost kind of start over, or do I continue where I'm at? Because if you say you're a sergeant first class getting looked at for master sergeant, and then you're putting a packet going in as a W1, right? You're kind of basically starting over. What kind of thought process were you going to? Was your family involved? I mean, for somebody listening that's thinking, maybe I want to drop a packet, I mean, what kind of advice would you tell them, man?
Obviously the conversation with my wife, that was very detailed of what we wanted to do. And it's, at the time, I actually could have ETS'd. I wasn't even indefinite at that point. So it is that constant choice. And, I'm going to retire from the military, and that is not an easy decision for one. But, warrant officers do, I've seen warrant officers 6 years, 8 years, you don't have to wait as long as 11 years. Obviously you don't need that much level of, it's just when I transitioned over. But yeah, that's a big decision. Do I want to retire? And it used to be, kind of kick it back to the retirement system. The blended retirement system kind of allows you. It used to be you were all or nothing, because if you don't make promotion, and that is a caveat I will say, if you don't make promotion in 2 years, you're liable to be removed from service. So you may not get retired. You're not guaranteed retirement in your MOS when you transition to be a warrant officer if you don't make promotion. Generally, that's not really a concern, because the guys and gals that switch over to be a warrant officer, you're top of your class. You're already leading from the front, but regardless, and if that is a concern with the blended retirement, now, if you leave with 15 years of service, you're still leaving with something. Now, when I transitioned, if you left at 15 years, you left with nothing. So it's a little bit different now. So that was something I had to consider. That you don't really have to consider that now in this day and age, because the blended retirement system gives you something no matter at what point do you leave. So that was a big one. And really, making that decision, which is a big one, is, I am a senior non-commissioned officer. You do already have, especially for those of you that are considering that are already a little senior. Well, I'm already here. I don't want to go back to the bottom. And it really goes back to what I said before. What am I trying to impact? If you like what you do and your MOS is, you enjoy it, and I have a passion, you have to have a passion. If you're going to be a warrant officer, you got to have a passion for what you're doing. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You got to like it. And if you don't, then probably not the path you want to go to, because you're going to be very, very in-depth with that job, and you have to have a passion for it, and you have to inspire people to have a passion for that job, because that's what we do. So right. Those are the big ones. Really, what did I want to do with my career? Because I had the choice. I had the choice of staying in and being enlisted, or going warrant. That's what really drove my decision.
No, I mean, and that is a big step. And to all our listeners out there, if there's somebody out there that's definitely interested in doing that, of course, there's websites that you can look into, and you submit your application, you get a couple referral letters, a couple of basic qualifications, a 110 GT score, and you got to be able to pass a Army physical fitness test and meet the height and weight standards. But by all means, anybody can do it if you really have a passion for it, like Chief Ariano was talking about. One thing I just kind of want to tell a story because of my background as an air defender as well. When I was a 14 Echo maintainer, be out there having to fix the equipment, and when it broke down, and sometimes we just couldn't figure it out. We'd go and change everything on the dang equipment that it was calling for, and we just couldn't figure it out. And as a last resort, we never really wanted to call the chief, but as a last resort, sometimes we had to. And they were just so technically sound that they could talk you through fixing the problem over the phone almost, and it would work. I mean, they tell you, "Hey, go change this or go change that out," and thing would work. And then you just be like, man, these guys are really knowledgeable about the system. And when you talk about the passion behind it, I mean, there is warrants for every almost every field out there, and you really become specialized in that field you get into. You become the subject matter expert for that piece of equipment. You know the ins and you know the outs of it. And I was pretty amazed to see, some of those technical skills that the warrants would bring. So, I mean, if you have a drive out there for becoming a technical expert, by all means, and that's why I want to bring Chief Arellano on to the show today to kind of let him give you his perspective of it and some of the back and forth kind of mental gymnastics that he went through. But, I mean, eventually you're going to get back up to where you're at, and get promoted. You're just like anything. You're doing your job. You're doing it to the best of your ability, and you will continue to get promoted. I guess one of my questions that goes along with your decisions to do that is like, was there something there that made you want to become a warrant officer? I know you kind of talked about that your friend told you to look into it, but what made you want to go ahead and go, warrant versus, an officer or green to gold or anything like that? What was the fact that the warrant officer corps kind of drew you in? Yeah,
that's an awesome question. So my decision, what really drove my decision is what can you change, right? And what I wanted to change in my branch. So once again, my experience is tailored to air defense. And what did I want to change in my branch? And I didn't really have a passion to change. I love dealing with soldiers, but in order to change things within your branch, you have to understand your branch. You have to know. And in the early years as a tactician, you do a lot of crew, you do a lot of tactics, you pull a lot of shift, and you're learning the systems, down to the beginning, and you're understanding architectures and everything. But as you grow as a warrant officer, where it differs and what inspired me to continue is you're writing the SOPs, you're writing the doctrine. In early stages, you're really learning and understanding, but when you get to a position where I am now, at the test attachment, I'm affecting change for the future of the branch. My recommendations and observations, are affecting how future systems are being fielded to our warfighter. And that is what really inspired me to switch over to be a warrant officer, is just have that opportunity. I love being with soldiers, and I feel that I'm a really good leader, but my impact now is to the branch as a whole, and having an understanding of that weapon system as an expert. And I'm very junior, and just, it's funny to say that, right? And 19 years, I'm very junior, because I look at my senior warrant officers, and I still am in awe with the level of just understanding, and those are my mentors. That when I have to give an answer, those are the people that I rely on to give me the information. So just that really was my drive to be a warrant officer, is that I am making that change. I am writing those GTPs. I am writing those defense designs, and that are affecting how, your weapon systems are being employed on a theater level. And it's a big responsibility, but it's exciting, and that's what really inspired me to switch over. So if that sounds like something you want to do within your respective branch, that's what you're going to do, and that's what they expect you to do, is sit there and give the recommendations of how we're going to move this branch forward. And you're the tactical expert that has to give that advice.
Hey, I thank you for that advice to our listeners out there that may be wanting to make that transition and help affect change in whatever branch they might be thinking about, or even the air defense branch that we specified today. And I would tell you that even as a CSM, we get tasked to find and help facilitate the field of the warrant officer corps, So, when we're looking at it, we're really looking at the upper tier non-commissioned officers, and we have to decide, like, okay, Do I want to keep some upper tier non-commissioned officers in my corps, and then I do want to give some to the warrant officer corps. So we have to make some big decisions too as well, and go in and make recommendations to those young NCOs that they would make a great warrant officer from their performance out there and the things that they do day in and day out. And it just, you start to see the passion that non-commissioned officers have with the system that they may be working with. For in our case, it's the Patriot missile system. But yeah, most definite. And we see them, we start talking to them, we introduce them to the warrants so they can start talking to them a little bit, and then also the warrants start seeing that dynamic in the upper tier NCOs that would make and shape into good warrant officers. So, we are looking for the cream of the crop out there so that they can continue to lead. Just like Chief Ariano said, you're entrusted in small teams to do what you do, and that's continue to lead and continue to advise senior leaders on what we should do. So, I want to say thank you for coming on to the show. I mean, the basis of all this was to, really get engaged in that process and allow people to kind of know and understand that if you're thinking about it and you're going back and forth, I think other people have done that too, and they've decided, hey, look, I'm going to go ahead and submit my packet and become a warrant. So if you're really interested in out there, the warrant officer make up technical foundations for our United States Army. They are highly trained technical experts who specialize in their field. So by all means, if you have that drive and that passion, go out there and get your packet put together, get with some warrant officer. You can get some recommendation letters out there, and you can get that career kicked off for you in the warrant officer corps. Again, thank you to Chief Ariano for coming on the show. I'm going to toss it over to him for some last words, and we're going to close out today's podcast. But with that, Chief, any last closing words?
Yeah, I want to say a really big thank you for having this subject, having the support from the senior non-commissioned officer organization and understanding the importance of the cohort of the warrant officer is super important. And I really appreciate you taking the time and having the discussion, especially for those of you out there that are thinking about making that transition. And if what I've said kind of goes along what you're thinking, now's the time, and don't wait. As much as you think when you do make that transition, you're going to realize that you still have a lot to learn from those senior to you in the cohort, because the branches, your individual branches, they're going to have some very smart people out there. So thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the time.
Hey, well, thank you. And thank you to our listeners that chime in on the BLUF line. Continue on, and we will come to you on our next episode. Out of here from now. Thank you.